Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next session of the CHARM-EU conference. My name is Niamh Burke, and I'm the Associate Director for the Global Relations Office at Trinity College Dublin, with responsibility for partnerships and student mobility. First of all, thank you for taking the time today to join us for what we hope will be an interesting and timely discussion about the topic that is sustainable mobility practices and solutions. As you know, according to the European Commission's vision, European universities are transnational alliances that will become the universities of the future, promoting European values and identity and reimagining the quality and competitiveness of European higher education. Among other priorities, the alliances will include partners from a broad geographic scope across Europe. They will offer student-centred curricula jointly delivered across campuses, where diverse student bodies can build their own programmes and experience mobility at all levels of study. And they are based on a long-term strategy focused on sustainability, excellence, and European values. European universities, therefore, have the mandate to introduce innovative solutions for sustainability mobility practices, and that will be strongly supported by the new Erasmus programme. Having this vision, the CHARM-EU Alliance is actively working towards building an inclusive and sustainable mobility framework that will contribute to the achievement of the European Green Deal. Our session this afternoon will focus on the sustainability dimension of mobility within the European universities, both from a practical and a conceptual point of view. The aim of the session is to suggest how we can rethink our mobility practice, to discuss potential steps towards introducing more sustainable student and staff mobility, and to discuss and debate how to conceptualise, organise and implement student and staff mobility schemes in a more sustainable manner. This is certainly a challenging area, and we know there are no easy answers. But to discuss and debate the important topic, I'm joined by an excellent panel of speakers with much experience on the subject. Firstly, we are joined by Nathalie Modjeska, an international programme manager for Montpellier University of Excellence, a French government-funded initiative that seeks to create in the Montpellier region a research-intensive thematic university that will be internationally connected and acknowledged for its impact in the fields of agriculture, environment and health. Our second panellist, Simone Hackett, is a senior lecturer at the Hague University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. She has been developing and teaching virtual exchange and collaborative online international learning courses since 2013. In addition to this, Simone is a researcher at Utrecht University and is currently carrying out research on the effectiveness of virtual exchange and COIL in helping students to develop their intercultural competencies. Our third panellist, Tessa Schwelt, is an Erasmus Plus support officer at Utrecht University, with a particular interest in the Travel Green Grant, a grant for exchange students travelling by train. Tessa herself has undertaken 3 separate exchange programmes as part of her studies and is currently undertaking a master's programme at Gothenburg University by virtual means. And our final panellist is Marinth Middeloff, a representative of the Green Office of Utrecht University. Marintha will tell us about her experience in undertaking an international exchange programme recently at Waseda University, where she took a particular interest in sustainable business and afterwards travelled back to her hometown of Utrecht without using any air transport. In terms of the format for the presentation, we'll have 3 10-minute slots on different aspects of the subject, each of which will be followed by discussion with a wider panel. Following this, we'll welcome questions and comments from you, our audience, before concluding the session. So our first presentation this afternoon will be on sustainable international mobilities, the possibilities, challenges and alternatives for it. And I'll hand over to Nathalie Modjeska of Montpellier University to take us through this presentation.
Thank you. I will need to share my screen, I guess, at this point. And let me just... First of all, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. Like Niamh introduced me, I am working for University of Montpellier and for a project I will rapidly present this project, but there's very little to add to what has been said, except that it's a consortium of 16 members. It's coordinated by University of Montpellier, and we work closely with locally implanted organizations, research organizations, schools, hospitals, to work with partners from the North and the South at tackling three main challenges that are linked to innovative agriculture, symbolized by the word feed, environment-friendly society, symbolized by the word protect, and improving human health, symbolized by the word care. And all of these challenges encompass all disciplines. What we do in this project, which is 1 out of 25 in France, we have projects that we fund research and research projects. We fund education, transformation, and innovation, and student initiatives. We work on the international area, and we are linked with the territory and the economy. For myself, I work in the international area of this project, and my work is mostly connected with developing international partnerships, supporting international scientific events to promote the Montpellier community, scientific community worldwide. And mostly I work with several calls for international mobility that we have developed to support these exchanges. And this is actually why I am going to start sharing some of the process and the thinking that we have started putting into renovating our way of thinking and doing things. So far, we've had 3 calls for international mobility, calls that we've called Explore. They have been happening towards the North and the South. They're incoming, outgoing mobilities. They're either individual or collective. And globally, up to now, we've had about more than 100 mobility projects supported, with about 1.15 million euros spent, and that benefited to over 200 people. And this is probably not the best number to give you guys, but the 2.5 million kilometers traveled by our people who are supported with the mobility is the equivalent of going around the globe more than 62 times. So having said that, this doesn't sound very good in a sustainable mobility event like today, but that's actually what brought us to, wonder, are we always doing the right thing? And indeed, we realized that we had some conflicting goals in our project. Some of the project's goals are to address, make a positive impact on agriculture, environment, and health, and change the world. And on the other side, we want to gain international exposure as an institution. And to do that, we chose to promote international collaboration through mobility programs that we fund. And of course, that creates more greenhouse gas, and that aggravates the climate change. Now, this reasoning, we really hit us last year in 2019, when the first thing on the agenda for almost all of us was climate change and the state of the planet and how urgent it was to save it. And that's when we decided to take voluntary action to mitigate our carbon footprint in the framework of our mobility programs, Explore. We decided to include a carbon footprint offset in the 3rd edition of Explore. And the minute we did that, we received criticism, and it was called greenwashing. We had comments about, it's giving the right to the rich to pollute, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lot of really interesting discussions, and that prompted the need to create a work group of experts, which I am not, and I don't intend to be perceived as one today. Let's make that very clear. I am not an expert on sustainable mobility or sustainable development, but we called on to experts from each of our members to take part in a group that was going to think about how we can make a difference in the carbon footprint of the Muse-supported mobility programs. Of course, the minute we decided that, the COVID pandemic started, which put all mobilities to a stop. And then not only did we have time to think about new ways to collaborate, but it also basically provided us with a very good opportunity to change the way we do things and hopefully promote lower carbon mobilities. So the work group has met 4 times. And what we did during this work group was share experience, share suggestions and recommendations. Our first meeting was about basically trying to set the stage for our discussions. And it started with, asking the questions. What do we mean by sustainable mobility? What qualifies that? How do we get there? Are all mobilities equal? And I'm not going to answer all these questions here, but they're there to make you realize what we went through in the process of the reflection we had. Then about the carbon footprint, how do we calculate it? Is it easy? Does it mean staying put? Do we go virtual? Does virtual mobility has no impact? And we'll see that it has some impact sometimes. Of course, the physical international mobility is unique. It's a unique experience, and nothing replaces the intercultural experience, the networking opportunities, and the language skill acquisition that it provides. But of course, it produces greenhouse gas. It's expensive, and we know it's not inclusive. Some people cannot travel, people with disability, students who have jobs that they need to keep to support themselves, etc., etc. So the second and the third meeting we had many observations that spurred up, and I chose to write down a few here that we are going to be taking into consideration to draft our next program. The number one rule that I thought was interesting to remember is the fact that mitigating carbon footprint has to follow 3 steps. And the first one is you have to start avoiding it. That's actually the key that I learned in talking to sustainable development experts. The number one rule is avoid producing greenhouse effects or greenhouse gas. Then if you have to produce it, try to reduce it. And the third and last resort is to offset it if you must. The second thing that we learned was that calculating an accurate footprint was actually a very complex operation. And our experts said they had to go under training to be able to do that. So be prepared for some technicality here. The third aspect was the fact that some mobilities could be sustainable, and depending on how much greenhouse gas they produce, when you favor rail over air, when you go for shorter distances, longer stays, or multi-purpose stays, and maybe I can explain more later on that. Long distance mobilities are sometimes requested, and we chose to say that in that case, they have to be duly justified. It could be that you need to go to Australia because there's this unique research center that provides training on equipment that is only available there, or a species that only is visible there, etc. So those would be, valuable reasons to travel far. We also thought that asking the beneficiaries to commit to reducing their impact once they get to their mobility, but also afterwards when they come back home, is something that we will include. We thought that because we were trying to make efforts, it would make sense to also take into account the host institution's green attitude, because we want to be working together at this global effort, and I think every little help can make a difference. The idea of carbon footprint quotas was discussed, and we thought that it might be a solution. Some universities have gone through that path. Should it be per student, per curriculum, per year, per individual, or per research educational structure, or per institution? You see, there are many different ways to look at these means of basically trying to control the greenhouse gas production. And at institutional level, what struck us was the fact that the experts said that most of the greenhouse gas comes not from international mobility, but from the local commuting. And then if we're talking in those terms, then should we take into account other sources for the impact, such as the energy effective infrastructures, the digital practices of an institution, a circular or non-circular economy that the institution would follow. So to conclude this presentation, I have a few words of advice that I am going to be implementing in my next project, in my next Explore program. And number one is to make sure to drive awareness raising campaigns. And that because we include this into our program already, we have started to prompt people's brains and make them think about their impact and become real actors. We believe that there's action that can be done at individual level and also at institutional level. We decided to systematically calculate the carbon footprint of a mobility and also to reward those who make efforts to be the most virtuous or innovative by taking that into a selection criteria, providing extra funding and maybe a competition with prizes for the most original ones. We would like to also encourage and facilitate practices that are homogeneous and policies that are harmonized among institutions, especially in the case of a consortium like us or of an alliance like CHARM-EU. And finally, we decided that if we're going to offset the greenhouse gas production from our mobilities, supported mobilities, then we should do so at a significant rate and locally. That is, favor maybe students' green initiatives locally, steer the money towards projects, research projects that will enhance and advance technical innovation, maybe for less polluting technology, protect the environment, and climate change mitigation. So that's all I had to say. That's how far I've gotten onto my path towards sustainable mobility. It is, as you can see, I'm in the middle. I have not reached the end, but hopefully this will help you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nathalie, for that very interesting start to our discussion. We will be hearing more about virtual exchanges in a little bit, but just in the context of your presentation, can you tell us what we know about the carbon footprint of virtual versus physical mobility?
Well, as I said, I am not an expert, but what I can say is that, for example, the experts reported some facts that maybe you are all aware of, but nevertheless, for example, it's proven that air travel pollutes 40 times more than rail. So that's the number one information to take into account. The other thing is also when you look at air travel, it's not all equal. For instance, medium hull aircrafts, so those are good. They're planes that travel usually between 1,000 kilometers to up to 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers. Those pollute a lot less than the long haul flights, which are the worst, apparently. And so those are some information that we have on this issue. When it comes to virtual exchange, I don't necessarily have exact data on that, but what was said by the expert is that the use of digital resources does have an impact, but we use digital resources all the time for our everyday activities. It's not unique to our mobilities, virtual mobilities. It's true when we send email with attachments. It's true when we use videos or when we download things. But most of the footprint coming from digital use is due up to 80% to the equipment that is used. So the tendency that the expert would like to push forward is to use less energy consuming equipment, that is more recent equipment, sometimes need to update your equipment, and also favor big data centers for data storage and go towards what they call meso centers.
Great. Thank you, Nathalie, for that. And we will be talking a little bit more about this in the next session, but just for now, in the context of your own presentation, if we were to, look at mobility from a staff perspective rather than a student perspective, what do you think we would gain from an environmental point of view and potentially lose out on from a student learning point of view, if we take that approach?
That's a very good point. And what I forgot to mention in my presentation, it was not that obvious, but the mobilities that we support in the Muse Explore program are mostly geared toward researchers and PhD students so far. We have not reached down to master level students, but that's one of our next goal. When we had the discussion with the work group, it became obvious that, having international physical mobilities was still going to make sense and it's necessary. And as to the public that would be allowed or authorized to travel, of course, there's discussion on that. It's a truth that most of the time, the people in an institution that travel the most are usually the most experienced scientists because they're experts in their field. They get invited to talk to conferences. They are big people that everyone wants to have on their agenda. So, and according to one of the papers that you had mentioned in the program, on environmental footprint between academic and student mobility in a large research-oriented university by Julien Arsenault of University of Montreal, he actually calculated that most of the travel done was made by professors by 80%. So they are the ones, even though in terms of numbers, they are much less numerous than the students, they are the ones that produce the most greenhouse effect gas. So we're also thinking that young scientists, PhD students, master students have a need to go abroad because they have to acquire necessary tools and necessary skills, language skills, education skills, sometimes have access to training on equipment or acquire other lab research habits. This is all very important for their future careers. And by going abroad, they also get to network with a lot of people, and that provides future job opportunities. So maybe it would be interesting in our research or in our search, for sustainable mobilities to try to have a better balance between mobilities performed by young scientists or young students and more advanced and experienced scientists who also tend to complain about the fact that they are always on the road, never in the office, etc. So it seems to me that pushing for more student and young scientist mobilities and maybe have some of the more experienced scientists travel more virtually will be a solution. And if the COVID-19 has taught us something, is that having complete virtual international conferences now is almost easy, and it's become the new trend. So maybe our scientists will be flying less and staying more in the lab.
Certainly, yes. And I think it's really important, as you've mentioned, to bring in the staff perspective into this conversation, because often we do focus on the student side of it, which is, of course, important, but it is interesting as well to look at the staff perspective. So before we move on to Simone's presentation, which will take us into more detail on the virtual mobility piece, I might just ask Tessa for her comments, I suppose, on Natalie's presentation in terms of staff mobility in particular. Tessa, if you have any comments on that.
Hi all, I hope you can hear me. I had some problems with my internet, which is something that we all suffered since we are online, doing everything online. But from an international staff view, as I work in internationalization, we used to travel a lot before COVID. And even within the Netherlands, we would move across the country for a 2-hour session with colleagues from other universities, but also internationally. And I think COVID brought us brought hybrid and virtual conferences, which is very important for the future. I think we all agree that meeting in real life across borders is very important. But I think the most important thing for now is raise awareness and to think about, do you really need to go to every conference in another country? We need to think about, is the learning outcome of a conference, of a meeting, of a thesis defense, of a staff training, is it as important and necessary to travel, or could we do this virtually as well? And then I think also what is a very important view in terms of staff mobility is that universities as employers, they need to accept and promote longer business travel in favor that the staff have more time to travel, for example, by train on a sustainable manner. And yes, of course, traveling by train takes a lot more time, but the train can also be your office. So I hope with this meeting, but also just how important sustainability is nowadays, that staff will think about this before choosing to go abroad for a conference or a staff meeting.
Great, thank you, Tessa, for that. And I completely agree. I think the train can be a very good office sometimes when needs must. Moving back to the student perspective then, if we could just hear from you, Marintha, a little bit about your comments on Nathalie's presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. So my name is Marintha. I hope you can understand me well. I'm here to present the student perspective on sustainable travel, sustainable mobility. But I can only speak from, let's say, the Dutch student perspective, because I am a Dutch student. I can't say for all the European citizens or European students in Europe. But I totally agree with Nathalie and Nathalie's presentation on the matter of fact of the experts that have been advising her on her grant project, because students do have such a long career ahead of them, and they still need to travel, to go to different places and meet different people, to start up their career, to basically also not to be scared for others, to lose xenophobia as a sense of knowing that someone from China is as much human as you are, or as much a student as you are. And that's definitely something I learned when I was in Japan. But I do have to emphasize that what I think about when Nathalie shows me her presentation, I think about the exemplary role that universities play for students, because definitely in congresses related to sustainability, the students who are there, they're looking up to how it is organized. They're looking at it as if this is how I'm going to do it in the future. This is basically the right way to for me to also well, basically they're just looking up to universities and how they organize these congresses. If they're also going to be very critical to you if you do not perform in the way that you're doing your education. If you are actually giving loads and loads of congresses on sustainable mobility, but then everybody has flown there, or the food is like mostly meat, and there's no transparency at all on the subject, students will see that and they will protest. And that's what you also see around Europe right now. They're not okay with this kind of hypocrisy anymore, because they don't want to feel like the university they've transferred to is a hypocrite. So with that in mind, I feel that the exemplary role that universities play in students' lives is very much important, and very much appreciated also if more transparency and more encouragement towards sustainable mobility is arrived, basically. Yeah.
Brilliant. Some great comments there, and I'm sure we'll pick up on some of that again a little bit later. So thank you, Nathalie, for your introduction to the session. Moving on now to the next section of our presentation, which will be on virtual exchange and collaborative online international learning, often referred to as COIL, which is an inclusive, sustainable way to look at internationalizing higher education. So I'll now hand over to Simone Hackett, who again is a senior lecturer at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, for her presentation. Thanks, Simone.
Thank you, Niamh, and also thank you to Nathalie for a great presentation. I really enjoyed listening to your perspectives there, and I also very much agree with you on a lot of the points you raised. So I'm going to share my screen now. I hope you see this. And yes, as Niamh said, my presentation is on virtual exchange, collaborative online international learning, a sustainable and inclusive way to internationalize higher education. So what I might do first is just explain to you the different terminology, because sometimes there is some confusion surrounding this. So what I want to explain is what virtual mobility actually means. So when we're talking about virtual mobility, it actually refers to students and academics in higher education using another institution outside their own country to study or teach online for a limited time without physically leaving their home. And students usually receive credits for the online courses they follow. So when the pandemic hit and all travel restrictions were put in place and students couldn't travel abroad to study abroad, a lot of them took up virtual mobility, started following virtual mobility courses from home. So that's basically what it is. It's different to virtual exchange, and I'll explain why. So virtual exchange is actually an umbrella term used to describe technology-enabled sustained people-to-people education, in which sustained communication and interaction takes place between individuals or groups who are geographically separated with the support of educators or facilitators. And there are many different initiatives that fall under this virtual exchange umbrella. And as you can see in the little image that I have included here, it's actually taken from a chapter which Robert O'Dowd, an expert in telecollaboration virtual exchange, wrote. And he's just outlined the different initiatives of virtual exchange. But the one that I'm going to focus on today is collaborative online international learning. So you already might see what the difference is between virtual mobility and virtual exchange initiatives. Virtual mobility is where students follow courses online, but there might not necessarily be any collaboration going on between students or lecturers developing a course. So that's where we're going with this. I'll turn to the next slide and just go into more depth into what collaborative online international learning is, which is a virtual exchange initiative. So what is it? It's a teaching and learning tool that helps students and educators develop intercultural competence across shared multicultural online learning environments. So in that sense, it can be seen as internationalization at home. So acquiring these competencies at home rather than going abroad to acquire them. It adds an international dimension to regular classes. So these regular classes are offered at a university, and it could be in a blended format, so half online or half in the physical classroom. It could be completely in the physical classroom, or it could be completely online. It's integrated as part of the coursework. So it's integrated in regular coursework. So a course that's already offered, it adds that international dimension to that course. And it's network based, meaning that academics who develop or who use COIL in their classes will use their network to find another partner, another COIL partner, another academic abroad to develop this course, but either using their universities' exchange partners, international universities abroad, or using their own research networks to find this partner. So that's what it is, very brief description of what it is. How do we do it? So, what does it involve? So it involves academics and students who are geographically separated, collaborating together online. Academics connect through these networks, and they find a compatible partner and a compatible course which they can develop a COIL assignment in. And this can be within the same discipline, or it can be in a different discipline, and the disciplines can just the assignment could just complement one another. So they co-design this collaborative online international learning assignment together, and this can take quite some time. The one that I just recently taught, it took us around 6 months to design it. So we were working constantly online together to ensure we had the perfect assignment at the end of it before the academic year started. It really involves designing a very well thought out collaborative learning assignment in which the assignment is complex and students need to depend on each other to complete it. So it's really the collaborative aspect is very, very important, and they can't just do it alone. They can't do the assignment alone. They need each other to complete the assignment, because through this collaboration, this is where students learn. Through this social interaction, to complete the assignment, students learn through this process. And of course, the assignment must include a cultural component. It cannot just be based on the content of the course. It also should include a cultural component whereby students are asking questions about each other's backgrounds and approaches to completing the project, and differences in communication and how they do things in their own countries. And normally speaking, the duration of this course and the time it takes to complete the assignment is around 4 to 10 weeks. Of course, that can vary. And also scheduled online meetings need to be planned throughout these weeks in which students meet online with one another and discuss and complete their assignment. So that's what it involves. And of course, if you have questions that you want to ask me about this, you can do that later on as well. Why are we doing it? So of course, the obvious one is students and academics develop intercultural competence through, of course, designing this assignment together, and also following the course in which they have to complete the assignment. They learn more about their own discipline and also other disciplines, and also from a different perspective. It's also very much in line with inclusive education, because although we're talking about whether students should or should not fly abroad and whether it's sustainable or not, we are really talking about a very low percentage of students who actually go abroad. So depending on where you are, it's only 10 to 22% of students are actually going abroad for a study abroad or an internship abroad. So you have to think about the other 78, 90% of students who are not going abroad. So how can we ensure that those students also have an opportunity to develop intercultural competence, have an international experience? So in that sense, COIL gives them this opportunity. And of course, when we look at the sustainability aspect, as educators, it's our responsibility to think of this too. And one nice example I like to use is according to Robin Shields' paper, which he wrote last year on greenhouse gas emissions associated with international student mobility. The gases produced from student mobility are equivalent to the total emissions released by entire countries such as Croatia or Tunisia. So, and that's just talking about this 10 to 22% of students. It's not even talking about the staff or academic scientists who travel abroad. So that's quite, when you think about that, it's quite significant. So these three aspects are one of the reasons why why I'm promoting the use of COIL within education, and maybe as an alternative way to develop intercultural competencies as opposed to study abroad. So what we need to know, I've been working with COIL since 2013, so 7 years now. And of course, I see with my students and also with my COIL partner students throughout the years, I see a difference in them. I see how they learn, how they're pushed out of their comfort zones to complete assignment with students who are from a different culture, and how they learned through this whole experience. And it's becoming really popular in the Netherlands and also globally to use virtual exchange at COIL, especially now with the pandemic and also all of these travel restrictions that are in place. But despite its popularity, though it's assumed that COIL is beneficial in helping students develop intercultural competence, there's still very little research on whether it is effective or not. So what I'm doing now at Utrecht University is carrying out several studies into the effectiveness of collaborative online international learning, such as, do students develop intercultural competencies through COIL? If so, what competencies do they develop, and at what level do they develop these competencies? How do they develop the competencies through COIL, and what influences them developing these competencies? So it could be the academic who's teaching the course, or it could be the design of the assignment, or it could be the language that they're working in, or it could be the technology that they're using, these things. So we need to get answers to these questions. And if we get positive answers to these questions, we can start using this to provide educators with additional grounding for further implementation and better practice of COIL. Also get more insight into tools and methods to assess intercultural competence development. And of course, if we get positive results to these questions, it will influence educational policy as well, which will result perhaps in more funding and resources for the development of COIL as well. And of course, offer an alternative way to develop intercultural competencies at home rather than going abroad. So that's kind of what I wanted to say here. And I suppose I know that we were talking about students going abroad, and that it really, I mean, there's no comparison to follow a virtual exchange course compared to a study abroad. I mean, the skills and the competencies that students develop when they go abroad, it's life-changing. But of course, only 10 to 22% of those students are going abroad. So we need to consider the other students and maybe see COIL as a basis for all the for education programs that we offer. And then after that could come a study abroad. But now it's not feasible, it's not sustainable to send all of our students abroad. So we do have to look for alternative ways to help our students develop these intercultural competencies at home. So that's it from me for now. And I'll stop sharing and give the screen back to Niamh.
Thanks very much for that, Simone. It's a very interesting discussion, and it's coming up more and more. I know at my own institution, we talk about virtual and blended mobility as potential avenues all of the time, and especially now. So it's certainly something that there is a lot of appetite for. You've touched on this already, I suppose, but I just wanted to ask you, do you feel that CHARM-EU should think about virtual exchange as a solution? It may not be the only solution, but do you see it as a strong solution in terms of finding a sustainable mobility practice?
Yes, I mean, as I said, I think it should be a basis within all education that we offer. But we also, and it's we're repeating ourselves in the sense that we should not so much just focus on students, because it is only 10 to 22% of students who are going abroad, and the impact they have, of course, every individual's behavior has an impact on the environment, and we should be responsible for that. But it's not so significant, the impact they have compared to staff who are going abroad. So I think, yes, definitely it should be embedded within all the education we offer. But as a solution for sustainability, I don't know if we could just say, yes, let's use this and have no travel whatsoever. I don't think I would make that statement.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with you entirely there. It's a challenging discussion, but certainly something that we should look at further. Bringing in maybe some of the other panelists at this point, because I think we have people, on the panel who have significant experience of virtual mobility, or indeed have heard about experiences of virtual mobility. So maybe starting with Tessa. And I know at the moment you're a virtual student yourself as such, in addition to your day job. So could you tell us a little bit about what your own preference or experience would be if current, restrictions were to change and you could potentially visit Gothenburg University to undertake some classes in person? Would you be happier to do so? Would a combination be your preference? And just maybe take us through your thinking on that.
Well, it's a funny thing because of COVID, I am able to follow a full-time master's next to working. It's a kind of dilemma because I love Sweden and I love the city Gothenburg. I love to speak with my classmates, but because of COVID, everything is online and it's going pretty well. I would say moving to Sweden and following the education fully there would be nice, but then I wouldn't be able to work here at Utrecht University, and I do love my job as well. So I think in terms of the CHARM-EU values, it's very accessible for me to work at Utrecht University and following education online, and this is because it's virtual. And I think there are most likely more people, more students like me that have a job or need to be in another country because of maybe they have children or whatsoever, and they can still follow education online. I have been to Gothenburg for a long weekend to visit my friends and my classmates. I went by plane now because of COVID, like I couldn't cross Germany. But I wouldn't want to go there every month or every 6 weeks to follow a class. So I think virtual education now is the best option for me. It's very inclusive, it's very accessible, and I'm very happy that I got the chance. And that's thanks to this this pandemic. But I hope for the future that this will be there and that other students can do this as well, because it's a very nice way to challenge yourself. If you have a job that interests you, but also if you want to learn more and educate yourself, it's a perfect way to combine this. So I do hope, and it seems like that this will be the future. So yeah, it's a dilemma. Of course, going abroad is nice and meeting classmates, but we have all those communication means to talk to each other, to work on group projects.
Absolutely. And as you say, the flexibility that it can bring, I think, is very welcome by many. Moving on, maybe actually looking at that blended version of mobility, so where we have some virtual and some physical mobility, and we are seeing this and discussions about this coming through on the new Erasmus program very strongly. Simone, can I ask your opinion on that? How do we feel about blended mobility options, and has that come up much in your research?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, it comes up as, you know, if students follow a virtual exchange COIL course, they will be so intrigued, they will be so curious about the whole experience, that it will encourage them to take up a physical study abroad, which is nice because, yeah, there's so few of them that actually do study abroad. But at the same time, I think if we have everybody doing this, it's just not feasible, it's not sustainable. So that cannot happen. So that's my dilemma or issue with this setup. So I don't know what the Erasmus Plus program, the new Erasmus Plus program, is going to look like. There's been rumors around it that it will include this virtual physical mobility, this blended format, but I don't know how it relates to the Erasmus Green policies and what we're trying to achieve here. It seems to me it's a little bit of it contradicts one another. And you also hear of like inclusive mobility, inclusive physical mobility as well, and sustainability being put in the same categories. And I just think it seems like it hasn't really been thought out completely. So that's kind of my view on it now. It's that, yeah, I'm not a pro, I don't advocate that we should use virtual exchange COIL to encourage more mobility. I think it should just be a standard component of every educational program in which students get the opportunity to develop intercultural competencies, no matter what, if they go abroad, if they don't go abroad.
Thanks, Simone. And then maybe looking at the student perspective, Marintha, I know obviously you've recently returned from a physical mobility and all of the adventure that involves. What's your take on this? How do you feel about virtual mobility, blended potential mobilities?
Yes, thank you. So coming back also a little bit on what has been said before, I feel COIL, looking at that, like 80% of students that are not doing any traveling now, and the 20% that is, I feel that COIL, when it's focusing on that 80% that isn't, is a very interesting solution, because you see that universities there want to attract international students more and more. They want more students because it looks better, And we feel that traction as well. We want to go to that university because it's been put out there that it's so awesome and so amazing to go there and actually feel this experience. So instead of like trying to push people over to actually go there, maybe people who don't even want, like students who don't even want to go there, I feel COIL is very attractive as a solution, instead of this other path, which is attracting more international students. Then going back to my own experience, I went to Japan. There's no hybrid learning there because it's not like you can actually go to Japan and then back here in Utrecht and then, you know, and have like one class a month or something. You would have to actually be there because I was there for 5 months. So it's an actual exchange. So COIL couldn't really replace that. But when I've been thinking about this, I was also wondering, why did I actually go to Japan? Did I need to go there, or did I just want to get out of my own hometown? I think that is an atmosphere that universities or students among themselves can tap into. That it's not actually the place, it's not actually the country that you really want to go to. It's just that you want to have a different experience. And that different experience can be also in the country next to you. It can be because there's already a completely different culture there. And then that atmosphere that is created around students themselves, saying that it's super cool to travel and the social norm. But it's also something that the university can tap into, saying that, you know what, there are multiple ways of actually stepping out of your own comfort zone, stepping out of your own box of what you think is intercultural communication, and then showing them that there are multiple ways to do that. Right?
Wonderful. Okay, I think we can expect some more discussion on this topic in our questions and answers with the audience. It's, as we said, it's very timely and topical, and no easy answers, of course, but certainly the questions and discussion and debate is very welcome on this. So moving on then to our third and final presentation, again on sustainable mobility, looking at best practices. I'll now hand over to Tessa Schutt of Utrecht University for her presentation. Thanks, Tessa.
Thanks, Niamh. As Niamh introduced me, my name is Tessa Schutt. It's very hard to pronounce for non-Dutchies. I work at the Student Academic Affairs Office of Utrecht University as an Erasmus officer, and I'm the project lead of the Travel Green Grant, our best practice that I will show in a bit. And at the same time, I study a master's at Gothenburg University online. I would like to start with our promotional video of the Travel Green Grant. I'm so sorry. I would like to start with a video of our Travel Green Grant. We started with this project in October 2019 together with the Green Office. Have fun, it's 1.5 minutes, and I hope you like it. apologies that it's in Dutch, but it means that green is not difficult and that Utrecht University is reimbursing your train travel to your exchange destination. I will now share my screen to start the presentation. Let me check. So, sustainable mobility solutions, a best practice. Let me check if it works. So the trend. We started in October 2019, thinking as frequent travelers working in internationalization, that taking the train is nice, but it's pretty expensive, hard to plan, and not always manageable time-wise. Of course, the new Erasmus program is starting next year. And from my work in the Erasmus office, we also had to start with Green Erasmus. We have a really nice green office at Utrecht University working on all sustainable things and aspects within our university. And one of their key features is to reduce the number of flights of staff and students. And Utrecht University itself would like to be a CO2 neutral university by 2030, but at the same time giving each student an international experience. This is kind of hard to be a CO2 neutral university, but giving each student an international experience. So from the Erasmus office, we started to think we should do something about this. And at the same time, our green office thought the same. So together we started this project, the Travel Green Grants, to make sure that our students have the opportunity to go abroad on a green way. So it's a co-project between the Erasmus office and the Green office. And our target is students going on exchange within Europe. We decided on the whole Europe, so not only the Erasmus program countries, but also Switzerland and Russia and the UK from next year on, because we felt like it's not nice for the students that go to Switzerland or the UK that are not part of the Erasmus program to be left out. We brainstormed a lot about the grant, but we thought if you go to Madrid, for example, or Lisbon, it's pretty expensive and it's long, but with an Interrail ticket, you could go in 3-4 days. It's a nice adventure to start. You could travel with students that go to the same destination. So the Travel Green Grant is a maximum reimbursement of €185. Our goal is to grant 75% of the outgoing students within Europe, which is around 350 students from 480. We have applied for structural funding from university itself, which has been accepted. So it's a structural integrated policy until at least 2024. As the current pandemic is happening, we had to decide to cancel our exchanges. So we haven't actually started with our project, but we have shared this just before COVID started in Europe in February. And it has been so well received by our students, and they were very excited. And we already had 100 applications before we had to cancel all the exchange. So we know that our students are going to make use of it. We try to use this year where there's no exchange to optimize our application process. But also we are hoping, of course, that the Erasmus program will fund us money for Green Erasmus. So we could use our university budget for other sustainable mobility solutions, maybe outside Europe. What about destinations that aren't accessible by train, for example, Iceland, Malta. And then, of course, we will have short-term and blended mobility. What are we going to do with this? And of course, Utrecht University is part of CHARM-EU, so we would like to have travel green grants for CHARM-EU mobility as well. our green office make the train zone map for staff members to choose when you should take the train and when train is possible and when it's almost impossible. Montpellier, Budapest, and Barcelona were already on the map because we have a lot of staff going there anyway. I added Dublin, so it's a rough estimation. As you can see, all CHARM-EU partners are accessible by train. Some are longer than others, but I think it's nice to see that our alliance is, or our partners are accessible by train, and it's not even that much longer. So I hope in the future we can make a policy among sustainable travel for staff and students within the CHARM-EU alliance. Next to our travel green grant, there are of course already best practices within the higher education field. I've named some, and we will talk about this a little bit later as well. Within Sweden, they are focusing on financial incentives for outgoing students taking the train as well. Uppsala and Lund University have programs already. Amsterdam University of Applied Sciences also introduced a green travel grant this year. Ghent University has already a policy on business travel for a few years, which is a very nice policy to look at for our alliance as well. And the ETH Zurich has a program on sustainability during your wall exchange, which I think is something we also should not forget. You can travel to your exchange destination by train, but it's also impossible about what you do during your exchange. Do you have visitors? For example, maybe 10 of your friends are coming to visit you in Rome. Are they all coming by train or by plane? Other things are like use a bike if you go on, if you move abroad, reusable cups for coffee. So the example of ETH Zurich is very nice because it's not only focusing on going the green way to your destination. I think this sums up the Travel Green Grant from Utrecht University and some other best practices. In case of any questions later on, please contact me or let us know. And thank you for listening, and I hope you get a lot of ideas out of this mobility cluster.
Thank you, Tessa, for that. That was wonderful. And I completely agree with your point about students and staff thinking about sustainability practices when they're on an exchange, in addition to just how to get there and back. So certainly that is something that we should be thinking about. In terms of your presentation, you mentioned some really good examples there from other universities. Are there particular elements that you think we should be pulling from or adding to in terms of the future of the university alliances or CHARM-EU in particular? Are there any key examples there?
I think the most important thing is focusing on a green mindset in terms of all things we do within the alliance, and about raising awareness. So what our green office is doing very well is we have some tips and tricks about how to find good connections, how to be sustainable. And I think that's already a step towards traveling more sustainable. And then I also think what Ghent University has, policies on travel within the alliances should be established. If we want to show that we are sustainable in terms of traveling, there need to be some policy. And what I said in the beginning, universities need to be promoting and accepting that staff travel can take longer and give staff more days, and not like, okay, you have to be there for a week and you have to be back on Monday again. So we need more time, and I think policies will make this easier and more adaptable for all, for staff and students, of course. And I think the financial incentives for students are important, because we've all been students, and you don't have a lot of money to spend on traveling. And I think if the university says, or if the alliance says, okay, you have to travel sustainable, what if you can't pay it? Then there should be some financial incentives. So I think that's the three main key features.
Absolutely, and I think we all agree with that. And also maybe seeing that getting to your new destination in a different way can also be an adventure. Granted, that's more difficult in certain places. I know from Dublin it's not easy, but certainly I think it can be part of the experience too.
And it's a nice way to see nature, and I think now we live online. I love to go by train to just clear my head, and maybe that's a good thing for the future, because we're always very busy and there's a lot going on European level, on national level, on university level. So I think we should highlight the pros instead of it takes so long, I don't have time. So I think that's a good thing. And in the end, we want to save our world. So.
Absolutely, and as you've mentioned, the students are very interested in doing the same. So I do think as we progress, we'll see more of that. Before I move on to some of the other panelists and bring them into that discussion, I just want to remind our audience that they are very welcome to send in their questions or comments. We will have a short section at the end to address some of those questions and comments. And we're also very interested in adding some of those ideas that you may have to our work as we continue to look at this and to research this. So that is most welcome from the audience. But moving, I suppose, to some of the other panelists for their take on this really interesting piece. Natalie, might you have other examples of best practice or ideas that we could potentially adopt in the Future Alliance or in CHARM in particular? I think we might not be able to hear you very well, Natalie. You may be muted.
That's right. Sorry. I found it very interesting to listen to everyone's participation and presentation. Thank you very much for sharing with us all. I'm actually learning a lot from all of you, which is, I hope, the case for everyone listening to this today. I found that it was interesting for me to hear Tessa mention the sustainability of a mobility that can extend beyond just the traveling aspect of it. I firmly believe that if we want to make a difference in terms of greenhouse gas production linked to our activity and especially to mobility, it definitely is something that we all need to work at together. As I said before, individually, but also, and that was something for me very interesting to hear from Marintha, which was to hear that the institutional approach of this makes a big difference in the way the message is carried out. I believe that programs such as CHARM-EU, in general, European university projects, and the project like the one I'm working in France are similar in the way that they bring together various organizations that not only can make a difference individually, but they can together have a greater impact, because that was also another part of what I had to, what struck me in the experts' reports or exchanges we had, was the fact that we were going down the same path and at the same rhythm. And if we harmonize our actions in that area, then I think we will strike stronger. The idea behind this is, of course, to reduce our impact on the planet. And it also includes using, reusable cups. It includes having vegetarian meals once a week. when you go abroad, but also back at home, and change your daily practices. That even if it sounds like it's ridiculously insignificant to a lot of people, I believe that if we each make an effort, it's like everything, we will have a greater impact together. So.
Great. Thanks for that, Nathalie. And Marintha, I'm sure you have some comments too. I mean, I know you will be familiar with some other practices, and I'm sure some of your friends have undertaken different types of mobility, but can you tell us a little bit about your own experience and your own adventure coming back from Tokyo, and also any other thoughts that you might have on this?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so like I said, last year I traveled from Tokyo on land all the way to Utrecht, and that includes 2 boats, a very large, long train in Trans-Siberia, in Siberia, the Trans-Siberia Express, and taking Flixbuses from Moscow all the way down to Utrecht. And you know, you can actually be, right now I could go and be in 10 days in Tokyo, because that is how long it took to travel on land. And yeah, of course, this was like a huge experience and a huge adventure for me. And honestly, how it happened, because I went to Japan, I flew there. I always take one-ways. And then when I was supposed to come back and book my flight back, I was like, I don't really want to. It doesn't feel good. And I don't know, I was on the website, I was like, oh, I don't want to do it. So I looked for different ways, for different experiences. And I was very lucky that a friend of mine, he recently did it. He recently went from one end of the world to the other end of the world, giving me the tools to actually arrange it, being easier than I thought it was. And then eventually doing it, and taking all those ways of commuting, experiencing also that being in a train for 7 days straight is actually very relaxing. It's actually very, well, it's very social, because it's kind of a little community if you're there for such a long time. People think you're crazy because they're like, why are you going so long in this train? You can just go there for 2-3 days, like normal Russians would. But I also made friends in the train and met people from Tajikistan and from Kyrgyzstan, like people I would have never thought I would actually meet. So talking about intercultural exchange, you already have it right there in this very culturally diverse world, where if you travel on land, somehow it's more open to conversation than talking into this kind of private airplane where everybody's just putting on their sleep mask, putting on their ears, and just goes and hopes the experience is over. So what I'm thinking is that for students, what I realized is that I didn't do this to say everybody should go and take a train to Japan right now. What I think is the message that I would like to give is that there are options, and there really are options. You have to break free of this idea that perhaps advertisements has told you, or social norms or rules have told you, that flying is the most comfortable and easiest way to get somewhere, and the most fun way, because it really isn't. And you can really have different and most incredible experiences if you have the tools to actually know how to get there through another way than by air. And I think that's also a place where the institution comes in, providing that knowledge, providing those tools. Because if you have that, you can, like, students can be way more adventurous than they think they can now, because it was actually not that scary at all. It was very safe. It was very much fun. So that's the message, and that's like my best practice that I would like to give to you and to students.
I think, and absolutely, you know, we would hope that you have a chance to share your story with lots of students as well, and really get the message out there. I think it's a really good description of what you've done, and the adventure that it's been. A few questions and comments come through on it, mainly to say how inspiring you are, which of course we agree with. but also questions around cost and whether there was much of a difference. And I suppose this kind of brings us nicely into the questions and comments section, but whether there was much of a difference in the cost in terms of travel from Japan.
Yeah, I can definitely elaborate on that, because that is 100% the reason also why, for example, the Travel Green Grant is a very interesting and very good initiative, because I calculated it. It costed 400 euros more if I would have gone like comparing air travel than going by on land. So 400 euros, that is a reasonable amount for students that don't have a lot of money. But I mean, I was going to Japan anyway, so let's be honest, I had enough money to spend to actually get there and back. And obviously I don't spend my money that much on stuff, because well, I don't. So let's say this was an expense that I wanted to take. But nevertheless, the Travel Green Grant does, therefore the Travel Green Grant is so important for students who don't have that money and do want to travel sustainably. And therefore, traveling by train should be more cheap, as we all feel is natural, than traveling by air. It's as simple as that.
Wonderful, thank you. Do any of the other panel members have anything to add on that, the cost of travel by means other than air transport?
Yes, if I may, I have something to add, actually. Because I recently found out, we all know ESN, Erasmus Student Network, who is doing amazing things in terms of studying abroad. But I also found out that they have this deal with Ryanair, the low-cost airline, that you get discount on Ryanair flights if you have a ESN card and free luggage. And I think maybe 5 years ago, this was reasonable when we weren't thinking about sustainability that much. But I really think that it has to start with us, with yourself, with the individual person to become more sustainable. But I also think that big organizations such as ESN need to come up with ideas for sustainable travel. For example, making a deal with Interrail instead. We know that students from overseas that come to Europe come to Europe for 5 months to study, stay in Europe, travel around Europe with cheap flights. Of course, not everyone, but a lot of them do. But we should, as institutions, as ESN, as student network organizations, encourage students to go by train and to see Europe, and that it's a nice way. And that, as Marente said, there are so many other ways to travel around, to go abroad. And I think the bigger organizations are an important key factor in this. And I think we should focus on this as well, especially as a university alliance, on the institutional level, on student network level. So I hope that also other organizations will keep this in mind, and that raising awareness about other means of travel and about other means of exchange, for example, the virtual exchange, are there. And it's not only the physical going abroad by plane, travel around. So I hope that this opens the discussions about this as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tessa. Okay, so we're moving towards the end of our session now. So I would like to give the opportunity to each of the panelists to give their concluding remarks based on the discussion, based on their own opinions. As we know, it's a topic that will require much more debate and conversation and discussion, but I do believe we've had a very good conversation today that will feed into that. So can I ask for concluding remarks from Nathalie first, perhaps?
Yes, thank you. Yes, definitely. It's really interesting hearing everyone's perspective. I want to again thank Marente for her feedback, because it's very valuable to hear it from the students directly. I do believe that providing extra funding for people who make an effort to travel light and with a low carbon impact, I think it's definitely important, and that institutions ought to promote that. I wanted to also react on the fact that we are very lucky in Europe because we have all these multicultural adventures that are waiting just outside our front door. But it's not the case for every country on this planet. And if you live in Australia, well, you know, you're not going to get a lot by traveling next door, because there's no next door. And if you live in the States, for example, it's the same. Or if you live in Canada, although Canada and Quebec are, you know, they have provinces that make, you know, that provide this cultural difference. But if you travel through the States, you're probably just never going to change much, you know. So, I mean, we are lucky that we have this opportunity to travel by rail everywhere. And what I actually wanted to maybe conclude on is the fact that it's not the mobility, international mobility in itself, that is a problem. It's how we get there. And so blaming people who go on international mobility and make them carry the weight for all of the greenhouse gas that are produced in the world is probably not fair, as we know. So I think this is just a little portion of the problem, that we have to look at it from a bigger perspective, and that maybe because, you know, right now we're being the put in the front row of blame and making and guilt, basically, for trying to promote international mobility, then maybe it's going to make our institutions work at a much higher level and promote being soft on the earth, as we all need to be. I think that's mostly, you know, that like we should also encourage for research for cleaner energy transportation modes. I think this is just as important, and it shouldn't stop us from, definitely should not stop us from opening from one another, you know. And I think the intercultural exchange is definitely worth moving around. As far as I'm concerned, that's been my motto, and I truly believe in enhancing a person's life by doing so. I think it's interesting that virtual exchanges and learning can provide that to some extent. But, you know, I liked Tessa's comment on saying I like to get out of my office sometimes and see some trees. Well, I share that with you, you know, being locked down in France, like probably all of you all over the world. Let's keep our windows and our doors open.
To you for concluding remarks.
Did you say my name? Oh, sorry.
Yes, Simone, sorry.
I'm really happy that this subject is high on the agenda now, and I think we really had an interesting discussion, and there are great ideas, and I hope we are an example, especially with our Travel Green Grant, but also with all the other stuff we talked about, raising awareness, working together with the Green Office, especially student perspectives, but because in the end we are doing this for our students and to make our world a better place. And I think that is the most important thing from today. Include the students about what they think, about their thoughts on sustainable travel, but also on exchange, on virtual exchange, on mobility itself. And I'm really happy that what I said, that it's high on the agenda, and that we have a lot of great ideas. And I really think that within Charm-eu we will make something out of this, and there are possibilities.
Any last words from the student perspective?
Yes, definitely. So I would like to end this by questioning ourselves, as good scientists do. So when we attract students to our universities or push them away to go to conferences, what is the message that we are giving them? Are we giving them a message of sustainable mobility and coherency and not being a hypocrite? Or is it that we want to open up their minds, to virtual exchange, that students have access to sustainable travel, and basically making sure that they know what the options are out there and that their institution actually promotes them. So with that, I would like to also then put the lens on something else, because now we've been talking about students a lot, and that's good. But as Natalie mentioned, the staff and professors, most of all, are the biggest polluters. So we should talk about students because they're the ones that we're educating, and they're the ones that this whole talk is for, and that's very good. But we should also talk about the professors and the staff that are commuting from place to place and then are actually exerting these GHG emissions the most. So if that is a big problem, let's also focus the lens on them and ask what can we do there to actually improve, besides also stimulating our students. Be an example.
Great. Thank you, Marantha. And then the last word to Simone. Do you have any last reflections?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Marantha says as well. I mean, I think there was last week in The Guardian, there was a report that said that 1% of the population, the frequent flyers they're called, are responsible for 50% of aviation emissions. And these are the ones that are traveling long-haul flights, three long-haul flights per year and one short-haul flight per month, or a combination of both. And when I think of that, then I think really that's a lot of my colleagues have taken more than 3 long-haul flights or one short-haul flight per month. So I think, yeah, really need to consider the academics and the staff, not just academics, but also staff, recruiters, marketeers, policy advisors as well, who are traveling all over the place. So yeah, and that also, but I still, because it's my area, I do believe that we need to focus on internationalization at home as well, because we're very much focused on students who are going abroad. But this is only, as I keep saying, it's 10 to 22% of students, and they're the ones who already have the mindset that they want to go abroad. They're already curious. They already have these ideas and want to know more about the world and are more independent in that sense. It's the other ones that are not going abroad. So I really think the internationalizing at home is really very, very important. And of course, this can be done through virtual exchange, collaborative online international learning. That's not to say let's ignore or stop physical exchange. I think, yes, encourage it. There's no experience like it. I did it. I loved it. I'm still in the Netherlands now. But look for alternative ways to get there. And that could be part of the assessment, student assessment of this study abroad or internship abroad process or assessment. So yeah, that's it. That's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Simone. So we're really out of time now. No doubt this conversation will continue for a long time to come, and really, really interesting food for thought there. For those of you who have sent in comments and questions, we'll certainly be taking them on board, and feel free to get in touch with any of the panelists or myself if you'd like to discuss this topic further. But for now, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of you for joining us, and have a very good evening. Enjoy the rest of the conference.